Three.
Okay, so welcome back everyone to our latest edition of the forecast contest discussion. Starting off with a continuation of a little bit of offline discussion we've been having about Hurricane Sam, just showing a couple of the GEPS tracks from Tropical Tidbits. You can see just a couple of interesting ensemble members making a left turn here at the end, so definitely bears watching. And the Euro also comes very close, and I think even looks like the operational wants to pull it closer to the coast as well. So hopefully it doesn't hit, but I'm also interested to see it hit because it's one of those weird conundrums where you don't want it to hit, but also you kind of want to be in the hurricane. Um, so that's all on the hurricanes for now. Um, Dave Darkangelo, did you want to continue what you were saying about the natural gas market?
Sure. Can you give me 1 minute? I'm kind of doing two things. So just
Okay, I'll just continue, then you let me know whenever you're good to go. Um, so while we wait for that, we'll go over the most recent verification. So obviously our verification was 40, which congratulations to Matt Rogers, got it spot on. A lot of other people were close. A lot of positive scores this week. The only negative scores were the CFS, a couple of the moving averages, and unluckily industry won, but it wasn't very negative, so we'll give them a pass on that. Taking a look now at the Dynacast. So this is the cooling degree days for our verification period, September 15th through the 19th. You can see a lot of warmth in eastern half of the country, central, western parts of Texas, all the way up into Minnesota, etc., but not too much warmth in some of the bigger demand areas. The deep south. Dallas did get decently warm, but other places like I think Houston wound up being actually a little below average. And Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Lafayette weren't too high above average, and those are your bigger demand producers at this stage in the game anyway. But still, you know, decent warmth over a lot of the country. Take a look where this particular, so let's switch to population. So this one was it looks like the fifth warmest all time. I'm sure you've heard that line before here. We say it a lot. Missed by fourth by a little bit as well, but um,
hey, Michael, can you see where the month of September is ranking in terms of CDDs?
sure.
Yeah, it's gotta be
What
up
are we through
there.
the
Top
20?
five.
We'll go 24th, probably fine. Let's see. We're currently number 9 through the 24th. And then if I go for the whole month, which hasn't technically happened yet, but whatever, will be looks like 10th
Okay.
overall.
Okay. All right. So reasonably hot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I thought it might be a little bit higher than that, but still not too bad. So I have a moment, Michael, if you wanted to kind of do a short segue towards kind of just more the commodities markets, if it's
Yeah,
good.
sure. Go ahead.
Sure. Okay. Thanks. So as I mentioned before we jumped on the call, we were talking about kind of the hyperactive attention towards all things weather related, which is unusual in the month of September, particularly with regards to kind of forward-looking weather ideas. September tends to become late September, particularly because of a rather benign time for weather interest. We don't know anything about winter yet. We really don't know anything about the upcoming heating season. We can speculate. We can draw some kind of macro conclusions, which don't offer much insight. But right now, there's been a tremendous amount of attention paid to even tiny weather changes because of the global sensitivities towards natural gas, particularly with regards to prices of electricity and natural gas, which are spiking across all of Europe and East Asia. And so there's some interesting dynamics at play. There'll be a tremendous amount of sensitivity towards Europe. We've already seen some headlines with regards to curtailing some some demand of natural gas across the UK. I'm sure other European countries will follow suit. There's concern about the high prices that consumers will pay. And in the kind of the general media has caught a hold of this, which is asking the question of if it's a significantly cold winter or even a moderately cold winter, is Europe in line for running out of supply of natural gas, basically, which seems rather dire. But the problem over there remains that they're tight on supplies. They haven't really received much from Russia. They went into the summer with rather low stockpiles and they weren't able to replenish. It was a rather poor hydro season in Norway. So there was lower flows of electricity coming out of Northern Europe. So it's just kind of a conflagration of kind of global problems. There's only so much liquefied natural gas that the United States can export. Everyone out there who can get it, namely Asia and Europe, are mopping up any excess supplies of liquefied natural gas that's kind of floating on the high seas. In particular, Asia has managed to outbid Europe on those, and what it's done is create this kind of like stepladder approach towards ever increasing prices. So prices for natural gas across both Europe and Asia are really near record or at record highs for a lot of countries. And so there's a lot of concern being paid if there were early cold, say in the month of October, October, but particularly November, if there was cold in November across some parts of the Northern Hemisphere, including the United States, that we really pinch early, the demand would spike and we really start to eat into already low supplies. Those supplies aren't very low for the United States. We're moderately healthy, but we're exporting as much as we can. And if it were to turn cold in all three regions, we'd probably be in line for some kind of fireworks, so to speak. We've already seen some fireworks in a lot of places, and there's just an interesting amount of attention being paid to it. Once the secular media, those who don't pay attention to commodities, pick up on it, then it's kind of becomes a national story in a lot of these places. So you're seeing a lot of headlines and a lot of attention being paid to kind of rather small weather changes, even though the weather right now really doesn't play a role. Kind of at the demand trough of the season. As we've come out of these the last vestiges of cooling demand, and we're not really quite there for heating demand yet. So normally a low time of year for headlines, and the meteorologist gets to take a little breather. That's not really quite been true these last few weeks because of what's happening both on the Asia and European side. So good for business. Adds a little bit of stress.
Yeah, I can imagine on that. Now, I don't know if you can answer this or not, but do you foresee Europe encountering, I know it's you said there's everyone's reacting to small changes, but do you see it winter leaning in a particular direction or not yet, or too early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell.
Okay.
But some of this sensitivity, it's a good question. And I think some of this sensitivity is that even small changes in the month of October, early October, start to either turn on or turn off heating demand. And, there's also these sensitivities towards going into high and low wind periods. So some of this a few weeks ago was predicated that we'd come out of a very, very low wind period for Northwest Europe. So wind generation for electricity was really quite low. It's normally low in August and September, and it was unusually low this year. We had, broad high pressure in place and rather light winds. So there's some sensitivity to even short-term things like that. So even forgetting or not even thinking about what winter might be, some of these kind of week-to-week challenges are becoming a bit acute. We should be kind of quote unquote piling gas into storage to be able to use in winter. And we're doing that in the United States, but we're not doing it in Europe. And so that's where the attention is being paid to kind of more small, day-to-day details. So little things like an extra boost towards wind generation for a week or so would really help. But when you don't get it, you have to burn natural gas now. It leaves less in the storage tanks for use when things, would really need it in midwinter.
Okay. That makes sense. Dave, did you have any questions or?
I just had a thought about the attribution a little bit, kind of like what you have up there.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting. I guess I was thinking, excuse me, devil's in the details kind of thing. You were mentioning, not to pick on Maxar, but Maxar had a kind of a tough CDD forecast this time around. It was a little bit on the low end, if I remember correctly. You were showing it earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And I pulled up their forecast, and if you want to do this for a minute, you can, as you can find it. If you go to where they have the 16, 20-day reports, yeah, you just go to August. It's August 31st. And I thought this was interesting. Yeah. So I think this is it, right? August 31st. Yep. And now, if you want, go back and show the verification on that other, and we'll just cut.
This one. You just fix this back to where it was it, September
15th to the 19th, right?
Yeah. Oh, scrolling 3 days.
Or just do anomaly, temperature anomaly if you can. I mean, it's not that much of a difference. Maybe it's average temperature departure. Yeah. Something, or yeah, it's a little easier. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. And I was looking at this, and I was looking at their map, and I was like thinking spatially, like first glance, like it's actually looked pretty good. I mean, like it's kind of like, well, it's very warm in the eastern half of the country, but I guess what happened is, this is where the latitude, I guess, matters this time of year, right? And they had a lot more of the warmth up in the upper Midwest, right? Like the focus was Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, I guess. And then going back to the other map, if you will, yeah, it's like the anomalies were a little bit shifted south. I mean, a little bit, meaning, I don't know, whatever it is, like the core of it was from the mid-Atlantic, New Jersey, right back in the other. You go
Yeah,
back.
I mean they had the warmth. I see what you're saying. Like they had the warmth. It's just the core of it was shifted, and if you
Yeah.
drag it down a couple hundred miles and flip it on its side, that's basically it's they had it.
Yeah, exactly. And this goes back to how difficult and challenging it can be, making a 16 to 20 day, forecast. Again, what was the verification was 40. They had 29. The normal was 30. So, from a CDD number for this time of year, the average spread, the 30-year spread was about 8 or 9. So, I mean, technically it was a tough forecast for them, right? I mean, they were off by what, it was a decent shift for this time of year. I mean, they missed it by over 10 CDDs. But again, from a spatial perspective, I feel like it doesn't look that, it looks okay. It's just right. I mean, just the fact that the focus of the heat was much further, further south as opposed to further north, it really hurt.
Yeah, but I agree, Dave. The sentiment of their forecast was pretty strong. They obviously should have had more heat in the I-10 and I-20 corridor.
Yeah.
But you're right. We want to give them the benefit of the doubt. That's, there's just not a lot of CDDs to be had from Minneapolis to Boston this time of year.
Yeah.
And so, I guess that's just the challenge of this game when you're forecasting degree days versus, say, like a departure from normal over some area. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to say, I'm curious what the EC and the CFS map showed, but I guess, yeah, you have them right there, and you can kind of see why they, I mean, I guess the EC did hint at some heat in the southeast. I mean, to be fair, there's that pocket. And remember, these are just an absolute anomalies, not standardized anomalies. And the reason I say that is because, to be all things being equal, I would think this applies, as a general rule this time of year and whatever. 2 degrees above normal in Savannah, Georgia is probably a bigger standard deviation than 2 degrees above normal in Winnipeg, right?
Oh, for sure. And
yeah.
I think, I don't know where you're going with this, Dave, but I think their forecast is significantly better than, at face value, than both the Euro and the CFS. It's my view, anyway.
Well, can we see what they had in the South? Michael, can loop it up a little bit? Yeah, the only again, I'm obviously, we're all playing Monday morning quarterback, but we're doing this with the purpose of learning, right? Not to pick on Maxar, but I guess my only thought there was a little bit of a hint of some heat further south. But I mean, in fairness, it was just, I mean, it's not a lot. And
any time of year too, summer or winter, like I always consider, like, we nitpick over these small cities like Savannahs and, the Buffaloes of the world. But ultimately, the main contributor to natural gas demand, or any demand for that matter, is confined to like 6 or maybe 7 cities at the most. Like,
Yeah.
it's New York, Chicago, Atlanta, either both Dallas and Houston, and then obviously someone in California. Take your pick. And their gravest sin here was, well, they had kind of Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, and New York on the edge of the heat. So their number comes out to 29. And it looks kind of bad from the way we score it. But, temporally, I'm looking at that and I'm like, I think that's a pretty decent forecast. It's just where they drew the 0 line, and, the verification, obviously. I mean, it's not terrible. And I think,
Yeah.
I don't know why I didn't read the communication around it. The reasoning looked pretty sound, I guess, at a glance. Again, maybe though, if you use a bias correction, it's been pretty warm since mid-August. You'd have to correct that a little warmer anyway. I don't know where their bias has been recently either. That might be instructive.
Well, and if anything, if I remember, we were talking a little bit earlier about some bias stuff that we've looked at. And I think with the GFS Ensemble, we were talking about that the model may have had a warm, well, this is a 16-20. So,
right. And we were looking at a 6 to 10. Right.
Right. Okay. So I guess that maybe just one other thought, or maybe 2 other thoughts. One, why I make the first point. Maybe we could look at the 500 millbar pattern, Michael, if you don't mind, just in terms of what the models were showing versus what verified in this thing. But I was thinking too, some forecasts are just so sensitive to the details, right? I mean, this is a case where, like, Dave and I are saying, like, at first glance, it looks like a reasonably good forecast for 16 to 20. And yet it's a little bit off in terms of the location, obviously the intensity too, but it made a kind of a big difference in terms of the expectation, which was, this forecast is going to verify slightly cooler, less CDDs than the 30-year, versus it actually verifying 10 over a standard deviation above the 30-year.
Hey, Michael, can you zoom out on that 500 millibar look and look at the hemispheric view?
Yeah.
That's it right there. Interesting.
So looking at the euro, it looks like, well, for what it doesn't look like either model for that matter picked up the strong trough in the Alaska, British Columbia area. Other than that, I mean, the euro has the ridging over the Hudson Bay. I think that's Quebec, if I remember it's been a while since I've done geography in Canada.
Totally
but
on the North Pacific Ridge, though. Like, it had it much closer to Hawaii. It's obviously it's a strange geographic look, but that ridge north of like south of the Aleutians much stronger than what it had.
Yeah.
And there's I think that's like your classic positive EPO kind of look, and it's not difficult to know that, like, the eastern half of the country is a blowtorch when that happens.
Wait, can you toggle back and forth between the CFS and EC? Yeah, I mean, I think you're being kind giving the CFS any kind of points. I mean, that North Pacific, that P&A pattern does not look good, right? I mean, isn't that kind of almost 180, like where it has
really horrendous in the Pacific West and Western Canada.
Yeah. I mean, that was not helpful at all. Oftentimes the CFS has a bad, temperature forecast, but the upper pattern's not too terrible. It's like, it's just a little bit different. It's just the problems it has at the surface. But this is.
Go back to the verification, Michael, real quick. Yeah, look, actually check this out, guys. So look at, like, between Greenland and Scandinavia, there's a pretty big ridge north of Scandinavia. Go back to the CFS. I mean, I had the ridge more of a, like, northern,
it's horrible. Yeah. I mean, it
puts a giant trough there between Norway and Greenland. Yeah, it's not a good look.
Yeah, definitely not one of the CFS's finest moments. That's for
And I think
sure.
in fairness, if that, right, I mean, if everyone knew that I think that, that the 500 millibar pattern was going to come in so much stronger like it did across the North Pacific / Gulf of Alaska, that ridge trough, that ridge trough couplet. Yeah. I mean, obviously that could have been a good hint that the ridging downstream from Arizona, because it was even Arizona that was quite a bit hotter than the Maxar forecast, all the way out toward the Mid-Atlantic, would be quite a bit warmer. But obviously, we don't know that, and who knows? Maybe there are some. We don't have that here, but maybe there are some bias metrics, 500 millimar height metrics, or something that in the future, we could look at that could provide some clues to this. I don't know that to be the case. Maybe those bias charts wouldn't have showed anything. So.
Yeah, I actually had I had it, where did I find it again? Yeah. It's not exactly what you're looking for, but Maxar does have this, it doesn't tell you what they're verifying, but it does show that the GFS ensemble has not been performing particularly well, consistently at the bottom of the pack on the 11 to 15 day time frame.
Yeah, this is nice.
For operational ensemble.
I just wish we had some plots to go along with it. But yeah, this is definitely instructive, and it's definitely helpful to know where each of the models, the correlation scores are, and how the 1 to 5 is relative to the other periods, and so on and so forth. And if there are any significant changes, that the user should be aware of. But yeah, you can certainly see that the GFS is less reliable.
Yeah, the surprising to me was the Canadian, other than this one particular patch here in mid-September, but the Canadian has been performing, just about as well as the Euro. I mean, no one really beats the Euro, but it's been keeping pace with it. So that's something that's interesting to me, at least in the 500 millibar 11 to 15. So maybe the bears watching. I don't know.
No, I mean, when you say bears watching, I think what you're saying is just in terms of whether it's a data point that folks should be looking at. I mean, is it? Did you say, I can't see in the table? Is it performing better than the GFS ensemble?
Other than the ensemble, let me see if I can.
Does it tell you? I can't.
So it's the GFS ensemble actually is performing about the same as the Euro and the Canadian. So those three are kind of grouped together, and the operational is just kind of, on its own, doing whatever it wants to do. But it looks like, just kind of eyeballing the green and blue lines, it looks like, other than, again, this period in mid-September, which I would guess might have a little to do with I forgot the name of the hurricane. Was it Lisa that hit New Orleans? Whatever hurricane hit New Orleans, I can't remember what the name of it was now. Ida, that was it. I'm guessing that would have something to do with that. I'm not entirely sure though. But overall, it looks like they're either about even, or maybe one's slightly better than the other. It doesn't. So see if I can get.
Okay, I was just curious. I think, because I think the point you were trying to make is, yeah, I mean, it's for folks who just want to assume that, hey, it's the EC followed by the GFS followed by the Canadian in terms of, I don't know, performance. Not so fast, right? It does seem like, based on what we're seeing here, it's very close, and that's interesting. And I guess what would make it more helpful, and I don't know the answer because I haven't looked enough, but how's the correlation between the GFS and the Canadian, right? Because in other words, are you getting new information, right? Because if you have 3 models that all have the same skill score, it can still be valuable to have, incorporate into an ensemble if there's some, you know, if they're not just the same model, right? Like if they are exact same model, which of course wouldn't be wouldn't be logical, but you're not getting new information, and there's no value there. So yeah, it'd be interesting to look at that a little bit more in terms of how the performance is. I like, what is it? The North America Ensemble, I think, might incorporate the Canadian and American or something like that. But I haven't looked at the skill score. I don't know if you've looked at that, Dave. Have any thoughts on that?
All right, Dave, I'm a little banged.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, hang on.
And while we're waiting for him to give his thoughts, I'll just toss out as well that looking at this chart, which is the 2 meter air temp verifications, the Canadian is even almost beating the year. Like, you know, there's this whole stretch for about 2 weeks where it beat the euro, and then, you know, it struggled around the mid-September area, but, you know, it came right back up right after I think Hurricane Ida affected it there. So, you know, in terms of non-tropical interactions, since it seems to struggle with that based on this one data point, I can't really say any other way. To me, it looks like, you know, the Canadian actually might even be outperforming the euro in some respects, and clearly outperforming the GFS in terms of temperature, both the ensemble and the operational. So, you know, if I were to put both the 2 meter and the 500 together, I would have to give the edge to the Canadian being better than the GFS ensembles, even for what that's worth. You know, so definitely something to keep an eye on into going into the winter to see, because if it maintains that level of accuracy where, or, you know, even if it doesn't, you know, a lot of models struggle, even the Euro struggles with temperatures in the winter. You know, that might provide a third data point where, you know, the GFS might be saying warm, but the Euro might be saying cold, and, you know, the Canadian can kind of be the deciding vote, if you will. Might still be wrong, but it's certainly certainly could be very helpful, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, and again, I just want to emphasize, just for the research purpose of this, that I think that becomes more instructive if we know that the models aren't well correlated, right? Again, for example, if the models are extreme, let's say the GFS and Canadian are extremely highly correlated, well, then what happens is you create like a time series like this. Well, you know, the errors overlap, and you're not really getting useful information. But if they're not in sync, I definitely agree with that. Then it helps in terms of incorporating that into an ensemble distribution, for sure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. I had one other, I don't know, Dave, are you still busy?
Yeah, Dave, I can't.
Okay, well, just let me know. I have a question for you when you're less busy, but yeah, back over to you, Michael.
Yeah, I'm just gonna do one last thing before moving, at least I think one last thing before moving on to our current week. I wanted to take a look at Matt Rogers' temperature forecast. So, you know, definitely got the eastern heat correct. A little displaced with he was expecting warmth along the west coast, which makes sense. You know, it's been warm there pretty much. I'm pretty sure the whole summer. So, you know, especially with the drought and most of California, and I think they got a little bit of relief in Washington this week, but you know, definitely makes sense to keep that there. Looks like he went MJO. Just take do not too much. Looks like overall, like, you know, I'm not gonna nitpick. You know, that this was the only cool area in the forecast, because, you know, there's no getting that correct out this far out is not the point of the pattern map. It's, did you get the broad picture? And to me, this is the broad picture here is correct. Okay, so that's my only 2 cents on that. Dave, did you have any other final thoughts before I move on to our current forecast?
No, I mean, you could, if you want, just because we don't have, since we're good for time here with just the 3 of us, you could show the summary statistics, and I think you continue to do very well, right, in some of these metrics. I think you're at the top or near the top. Is that right?
I think all I have is directional correctness, which
Well,
isn't.
yeah, I mean, listen, directional correctness is, some will argue it's the most important metric here. Yeah, what are you at? 70, over 70%. You're the only one over 70.
That's
Dr.
really-
Decker.
It's very good, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look at this. It's not like last summer where everyone, or some previous summers anyway, where everyone's in the 60s and 70s or something like that. Yeah.
Right. There was just enough volatility this year to kind of like put a cap on that, right?
Yeah.
It was a hot summer, but we had just enough volatility, or at least a little bit more, right, than the last few summers, Dave. So, yeah,
Yeah.
70 is that gets the gold star. That's really good.
Yeah.
It's really great forecasting, Michael, on like directional correctness.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is the year? Do you got? Is the euro on there?
Let's see. Yeah,
51. Yeah. So like the euro is kind of a standard. You want to be kind of near the euro. Dave's on it. I'm a touch low actually. On a fewer forecasts, but I'm a little bit on the low side. So yeah, anything around the euro is considered like you got to beat the euro, consistently. It's just a challenge to do that. In this year, I mean, the euro's not been, none of these models, euro and obviously CFS, we know comment 33%, but it's a tough metric to beat. There's a lot of effort being put into just can we beat the euro directionally, right? And even then, it's challenging to think that there's like what we call actionable information on that. But yeah, to kind of beat it the way Michael has is a pretty great accomplishment.
Yeah, definitely. That's all I had, Michael.
Okay, and I'll also mention, looks like it's been a kind of a, I think it's reflected in my performance score here, which isn't that great. That it's definitely been a tough summer, not one that going back to 2020, even if it'll load, okay. A lot of positive scores. Matt Lanza was up there. Industry was super positive. Former student Zach, Dr. Roundy, Matt Rogers. The list goes on. And even a lot of people in the high 80s in terms of hit rate. Dave, Phil, Matt again, both Matts actually. Dr. Decker up there as well. It's just goes to show you how much more difficult of a summer this has been, at least from a 16 to 20 day perspective for forecasting. And with that, I think we'll go now to our most recent forecast. I think this one, yes, okay. So looking at this, looks like we have a pretty decent spread of I think that's enough said. 8.7 on the CFS, all the way to Josh Herman at 38.9. A couple of our students, Clayton, I don't know which groups these are, but looks like one of the groups is around 20. David Christian, I want to say this one's Rutgers.
Yeah, he's Rutgers.
Yeah, so Rutgers seems to be 19, going 100% CFS. I'm not sure Correct.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, this is
I like this. I like this.
yeah, he probably should have put that in the formula, but we actually talked about this a couple days ago. I talked about this with David because I'm in the Rutgers class. And yeah, I like what they did. I mean, I didn't tell them to do this, but we did talk, I think a week before this. We had talked, we were talking about the forecast contest and different strategies and stuff. And we had talked a little bit about, and you don't have to pull this up. We've talked about it ad nauseum, but the GFS bias and things like that. And so, or CFS bias, whatever. But yeah, so I was happy to see that, one of the students decided to go with that kind of strategy, and we'll see how that works for him.
Yeah, I mean, we've said at least probably half a dozen times in the last 3 weeks at minimum, the CFS is one of the easiest models to bias correct because it's always so consistently wrong that, adding +10 is usually a pretty good bet. So I hope they keep that, and it'll be an interesting research metric to see if that still holds true. Because I think it was Nat Johnson that did the research, right?
Right.
And I think that was a couple of years back now, if I remember correctly, or at least a year.
It
by
was,
now.
but the bias hasn't changed much, has it? So,
Yeah,
right.
which is interesting because I think the model has been upgraded since then, right?
Been upgraded 100 times in the last, 20 years, and they still can't get rid of that darn bias,
Yeah, I mean, at least they're consistently wrong.
That's right. That's
um,
right. That's right.
I have a
So look,
comment about the, I think, what model were you saying has been upgraded?
I
Michael?
think has the CFS been upgraded recently?
Dave, I'm not sure. Not.
No, I don't know that CFS has been, but we were just saying like over the last 10 years or whatever,
Right. Keep in mind too, the CFS is an outgrowth of today's GFS.
Right.
And the GFS was never, it's not been designed and optimized to forecast day 15 well, right? That was never it's still not the stated goal of doing that. I think it becomes like this kind of interesting interplay between like the computing power and time limitations and, all kinds of things, but it's not a model that was ever optimized to perform well for what we're doing in this contest. So I'm trying to cut it a little slack, but not too much, obviously. But we're not like we're looking at something that like it's clearly not its wheelhouse. I mean, and the joke.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying.
The joke would be like maybe the GFS doesn't have a wheelhouse, but its long-term skill is actually very close to the European, right? Like the European, I think, gets an unfair positive reputation for being the best model, and at any point in time it is not, and that's the nature of the challenge that we face. But it's beating the CFS and the GFS over a long track record, but not by much, and that gap has slowly narrowed over time. So I think we always it's a good punching bag for us, but I think in some ways unfairly so. 2 cents off my soapbox.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, the CFS does provide an interesting, bit of information where if you just bias correct it by, on average 10, sometimes it's a little more, sometimes a little less. I think it's interesting that often will get you pretty close to, what the actual verification is. And, to be fair, not to say it's good to be wrong, but if you're consistently wrong, I think that's a little bit better than being all over the place all the time. Which I'm kind of, I don't know if it sounds like it, but I'm saying that in defense of the CFS.
Yeah, no, definitely true. Definitely true. It's helpful to be consistently wrong. Yep.
And I'm just gonna since we're running a little low on time, I'm just going to look at the other two. I think there's two left. Yeah, the other two student forecasts, and then I'll do my forecast. So the derechos looks like they're around 15, looking with mostly climatology, some EAC and CFS. Typhoon in the Western Pacific. This is interesting that they looked at the typhoon recurvature potential. Something that at least for me, I often will overlook that since I don't usually look at the models directly. But it's interesting that they mention this. There'll definitely be something to look out for. Haven't heard much about the typhoons in the Pacific this year. I heard I think it's a record low season up there.
Now, I'm sorry. What was their tie-in with the typhoon? What I can't.
Looks like caused the ridge to be shoved a bit more into the upper Midwest, Northern Rocky area, opening up a trough in the eastern or southern United States. So, basically, they're saying that if this is the derechos, so
Okay.
I believe this is the
Dark Angelo's group.
yes.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so the reasoning behind this is, and like if you look at where the forecasts have kind of trended the last 5 days, is the peak of the ridge looks like it's sitting up over, I don't know, somewhere in south central Canada. So you have this kind of soft underbelly of the ridge to expose yourself, right? I think that's what you're seeing with these models trying to force some tropical activity somewhere near the East Coast. If it's not sand, it could be something else. And so, we didn't go with any particularly cold look, right? I think we're 15.9, but there's this idea of like, that's the general pattern. The ridge kind of parks itself over Canada and the Northern Plains, Northern Rockies, and you're exposed on that eastern southern periphery. Not saying it's a trough that would have any depth to it, right? There's no cold air connection. It's just describing the pattern. That's all we're trying to do.
Got it. Cool. No, that's a lot there. That's pretty cool.
Okay. Listen, we're trying to we're not here to score points. We're just here to look good.
Yeah.
And I've emphasized with them, like, don't get hung up on the number. And I'm coming at this from a very from a more business standpoint, right? The number is obviously instructive and it has value, and we're going to get scored against it. And you may think that's fair or unfair. It's, that's just the nature of how it goes. But I think from an educational learning perspective, we'd like to describe the things about getting the pattern right? That to me is more important. Like, can you identify some of the factors which lead you to be able to, define like how the macro looks, what's the base state, so to speak. And I think if you get that right, even if you don't get the number right, even if you're not the best with the number, I think that's a win. And I think you're thinking about it from a little bit of a different perspective too, because now you're trying to look at it, as a broader puzzle, not just coming up with the right formulaic concoction. And I'm not saying that the formulaic concoction is wrong. In fact, it's probably the right approach for contests like this. But I want them to get to think a little bit broader than that and say, like, well, what's the bigger picture look like, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. It's just, I love it. God, I mean, sorry. I love this stuff. And anytime I see this, like, it's like, I want to, like, when I see that, the sort of, the postulate there about, hey, it's going to shift the pattern and this, that, and the other thing. I wish we could create charts and time series that can demonstrate that. I just wish it was a little easier. I wish, we've talked about some of these things. I wish we could show an forecast error chart for the 11 to 15 when there's a typhoon in the Westpac at a certain location. I wish we could just pop that onto the screen. And some people may have some of this information somewhere, you know what I mean? But it's like, to make some of this stuff more readily available, I think it'd be so helpful. Like, does the forecast errors change as a function of X,
I think it's challenging, Dave, with the sample size would be still, on too small. It becomes really small, right? I think that's our problem with a lot of these things.
It would be, but I would say, which is not necessarily true, but I always say it, that most of the time some data is better than none. So in other words, if you threw in front of me right now a chart that had the last, I don't know, 35 typhoons in the Westpac, and then the forecast errors in the United States 11, 15 days later, I'd want it. I'd want to see it. Now, would it be completely conclusive, whether it showed good, bad, or ugly? Probably not. But I'd still love to see what those 35 skill scores are in November, or December, or October, or whatever it is, or July even, just to have it as a reference point. So I don't know. But anyway, I'm off my soapbox now.
No. So one more thing about this, like some of our notes here, and we group text that we're kind of sharing this information with them and batting it around, is we were talking about this on Monday. And so I think one of the challenges of a meteorologist often is like there's the forecast, and then there's the noise, not the noise. It's like what's the front page news going to be the next couple of 3 days, right, so to speak. And so we identified the typhoon as being a potential challenge to this forecast period. And it's really twofold right now. It's become Sam in the Atlantic as being a potential challenge on the pattern that week. And lo and behold, it's the vendors that later Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, they pick up on the typhoon and start talking about it. So like, in a sense, we front run the headlines. In this sense, it wasn't really a market moving event, but it's nice to be able to get out in front of what are people going to be talking about when they come in, say tomorrow or the next day. And we like doing that.
That's a great point.
It ends up being a bit of a deer. It ends up being looking like a little bit of a Dear Diary, but and again, and that's the emphasis, that the number is important, and we're not trying to diminish that, but we're thinking globally, right? That's a term, right? We think globally. We act locally with the number, but we think globally. Very cliched.
I like that. Yeah, that's good.
And if we get smoked in the end, then they can blame it on me. I told them that too. I was like, don't take this personal. I'll take all the heat for this.
Well, for what it's worth, you've got a lot of good names around you. Dr. Lupo, I think yourself, me, Matt Rogers.
Yes.
A lot of good names around that forecast. So I think it'll be fine.
Well, we'll see. I mean, that's the fun, right? That's the fun part. The fun part is like seeing how right or wrong you are, and then I think the cooler part is talking about kind of like what's the bigger picture. We always don't have a handle on that, and I'm not saying we will on this one, but I think that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was I always whenever somebody, which isn't often, but whenever somebody asks me their something related to forecasting at this range, I try to tell them, like, don't lose track of the big picture, so, which is something I still do myself all the time, but
yeah.
There's an old school, this is going to give away a lot, right? Dave and I are really old. So I'll share, this is a story. So I'm going to segue since there's only 3 of us and we have the floor. So there's an old school way of forecasting, and the old school way that I learned, and I learned long before you could ever come in and open up your screen and see day 15 or 16 or 20 day, was try to forecast from the very building blocks of the short term, right? So let's say you maybe know day 3 or 4, maybe day 5, and you look at it from a global perspective, and you kind of look at the factors that are kind of driving the pattern. And you obviously know where you've come. You've had a history, right? There's a lot of pages that have been filled in over the last number of days, weeks, and months. So maybe you have some sense of that. And if you didn't know anything else, if you didn't have a model to look at, if you didn't have a CFS, if you just could see day 4 or 5, what would you predict for 7 or 10 days down the road? And it can be an instructive way to get people to think about things like teleconnections and wavelengths and cutoffs and things like that, and like more of the base state atmosphere challenges. And then only then do you go and actually look at the forecast, right? The temptation is very easy now to come in on any shift or forecast problem and say, go right to that time frame. And I think we tend to lose sight of kind of like the building blocks of what it took or is taking to get there.
Yeah.
It's my mic drop moment for Friday afternoon.
That might be a good place to leave it. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to leave it. So,
You're
know,
shooting- in a sense, you're cutting me off, is what you're telling me.
It's like that
No.
at the Oscars, right?
Thanks, guys. Thanks for the floor. Actually, I appreciate it. This is actually a good conversation today.
Yeah. As opposed to most days.
No, they're all good. Very helpful.
Just kidding.
I don't know who chose this time though. That's gonna have to get reviewed.
We'll have to review that. We'll have to look at that again. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Good job. Bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.